I'm Chance Dorland, and welcome to the Oink Only in Korea podcast, brought to you each week by KoreaFM.net, an online radio station featuring independent musicians and original podcast content from the Korean Peninsula. As always, I'm joined today by Travis Hull, the man behind the Only in Korea Facebook group. And Travis, it's been at least a couple weeks since we spoke. What have you been up to? You're working. You're a working man now.
Yep. I'm back to my full-time schedule of corporate English teaching, and you can kind of tell, if the season's changing is, it's we had some, I guess, yellow dust the other day, and as usual in the springtime, the U.S. is doing their military exercises, and North Korea is not happy about that. So you can always kind of tell when the seasons are changing here based on, I guess, the weather for one, and then what North Korea is up to. So that's kind of been interesting.
Well, in all fairness to North Korea, I feel like their motto of just like we're going to nuke and F everyone over is kind of 4 seasons long. I don't know if that changes based on the seasons.
I think it increases with the military exercises that are going on. Every spring it seems like the rhetoric just gets ramped up a little bit more than normal. And I think those military exercises are starting this week, as far as I know.
Yeah, and that's, of course, a normal thing. So you're right. It is kind of like on a clock, and you do notice some things. I'm sure if you look back in time, you could see some increases in tension. But as I just noted as well, back a couple months ago when it was cold, we were still hearing a lot from North Korea. So I don't know. Maybe it's a little different this year.
Yeah.
But something that is not different this year, and it hasn't been different for quite a long time, probably since really there have been cars in Korea. Maybe I'll just go out on a limb and say it's been kind of universal like that. There have been some bad drivers and some bad parking in South Korea. These are 2 topics that are very near and dear to my heart, as I really believe, deep down, one day, I'm going to be struck dead by a car here in Seoul, standing next to my girlfriend. Hopefully, I'll do the nice thing and like push her out of the way. But maybe she'll see me get hit by a car, so that, that love will be seared into her for the rest of her days while I'm just dead. Because this happens all the time. Whenever we're walking in a crosswalk here, we always have to watch out, because that's the worst time for your safety. That's the time that you're always going to get hit. And I just noticed this time and time again as my girlfriend and I are walking home to the place that we live together here in Seoul. The reason I bring up that horrible story, and the reason we're discussing this today, is because a new website just popped up called Parking Vigilantes of Korea, which asks, quote, "Have you had enough of asshole parking? If so, you've come to the right place." And you can check them out at pvk.website. We're getting all these weird URL extensions. .website.
Yeah, I think they increased the number of URLs, so you can register almost anything these days.
Yeah, it used to be everything was .com, .net, or .org, and then all the countries wanted their own endings. So I get that, the .kr, .co, everything else. But yeah, .website. Well, at least it's right there. You know what it is. And 10 Magazine did a recent write-up about this, so I'll take some information from them. Thank you, 10 Magazine. They write that Parking Vigilante in Korea is a new website that sells Korean-language stickers designed to be attached to cars that have been parked with little to no consideration for others. So, promising to both anger and embarrass the guilty parties, the stickers read, quote, "Congratulations, you've been chosen as a perfect example of a self-centered, entitled asshole driver." That's, of course, in Korean. That statement, made on a bright A4 yellow and red sticker, is with a apparently seriously strong glue, so I guess it will stick. The guys might have to take out some alcohol to get that off. Is also surrounded by multiple examples as to why the recipient may have been selected for such a high honor of this sticker. 10 Magazine says some of the examples translate roughly as, "I'm the kind of human garbage that parks in a handicapped space even though I'm not handicapped. I'm too fucking stupid to park within the lines, and I crave attention so much that I park in fire lanes." The stickers start at about $10, 10 American dollars for a pack of 10, and the website also accepts user submissions where you can upload pictures of putting these stickers on cars. So that's parking. I've checked out that website. $10 for 10 stickers is kind of a lot, but this is such a novelty item. I think I could probably throw down to get those. And also, there's only one user submission, I believe, as of now, but I could see that exploding at any time. That's parking, Travis. But as you know, as I just mentioned, I'm not going to get hit in the crosswalk by a parked car. So driving, dare I say, is equally as bad here in Korea. I'm usually not driving. I'm in a bus. I've been actually in a bus that's been hit by a car. Hats off to the bus driver and the people on the bus. It was no big deal. Everyone was just told to get off, and we got off into another bus, and there was no fist fight or anything. But, that happens. And according to the most recent OECD statistics, Korea actually has been the worst country for traffic fatalities in the entire group and has held that spot since 2013, which means that driving in the ROK is only better than countries like Albania, Georgia, India, Montenegro, Russia, and Ukraine, which are also included in that OECD data. So perhaps because of this, in Korea, dash cams that constantly record video both in front and behind the vehicle. Sometimes you'll get in a car that has dash cams in both directions. They're very common, and they're actually referred to as a black box here on the peninsula. A black box, of course, is that recorder from an airplane that is usually all that survives, after the plane crashes and everyone dies, and they try to figure out what happens. So more or less, not only is the perception that parking and driving in Korea is very bad, and this is something that could be said about me. I have very bad perceptions about drivers and parking in Korea. This is not just what people think. This is backed up by actual data, at least certain sets of actual data. There is some truth to this at the very least. And so that's why we're talking about this today, Travis.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there is definitely the perception there, and then there is data to back it up. You constantly see articles reported that Korea has, the highest fatality rate for pedestrians in the OECD. There's all kinds of data to back up that perception, I think. And it's certainly something that gets a lot of play in the foreign community. Before this website, Parking Vigilantes of Korea, was created, there was also another group on Facebook called Failed Parking in South Korea, which has over 1,000 members. And then there's another one called Failed Parking and Driving in South Korea, which has 500 members. And people there post, just ridiculous examples of parking. So it's certainly something that catches foreign nationals' attention when they're living here in Korea.
And we had another poll this week. Why don't you talk about that? It was another 100-plus vote poll. The last one we did, I think that was probably the first time we hit 100, and this one easily surpassed 100 votes.
Yeah, this week I didn't really ask them a specific question. I just kind of was more looking for opinions on driving in Korea, and the overwhelming, majority of people said that there needs to be a crackdown, big-time crackdown on traffic violations here. And, people also complained about the lack of people using indicators, or just people using hazards for no reason, causing confusion, accidents, and road rage. And, there was a slight majority of people that got the third most number of votes that stated, driving here has improved significantly over the last couple of decades, which I would say is probably true. I guess, I didn't live here in the 1980s or 1970s, but I've had students who said that, if you had a car back then, you were considered to be a little more elite, and people kind of took advantage of that, driving however they wanted to.
But we'll talk about some of those other responses near the top, but could you imagine what that means if it's worse? I mean, I'm being a little comical here, like someone is not trying to kill me when I'm in the crosswalk with my girlfriend, but it feels like that at times. But I can't imagine it being noticeably worse. What it would be, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, 30 years ago, like you just mentioned. Can you imagine that? What would that be like?
I lived, in Cambodia, and I've traveled all over Southeast Asia. I've been to China a couple times, and I can see that it's a lot worse in those countries when you compare them with Korea. It's mostly, to me, it seems it's mostly because of all the motorbikes that are on the roads in those countries, whereas Korea is,
Okay, yeah, so that's a little different. When I'm talking about traffic, you definitely see the motos here in Korea, the motobai, as they would say. You see those all the time, but they're nowhere near a sizable amount of the traffic. You just notice them because they're weaving in and out. It's by far just cars. So if you changed the type of vehicles that were on the road, I could see that being a difference. But I just point this out because I'm really afraid of. I feel like I'm going to get hit by a car. Like that's what's going to do me in here. As I've mentioned, I was in the Peace Corps. I lived in Colombia for a couple of years, and the biggest problem there that I saw was just that the roads were in such poor condition. Like there'd just be a giant hole in the road, and so you'd have the cars like weaving in and out. It'd be a straight road, but the cars would be doing like figure eight type of like back and forth because they would just be dodging the holes in the road. But I didn't see people run red lights like I see here in Korea. I didn't see people. Well, maybe they couldn't go ridiculously fast because they would fall into a giant hole. But, I didn't see people that were particularly speeding either. It just seemed like the infrastructure was so bad that probably, could have, and some of the cars are crappy. So maybe the car just would have hit someone and just like exploded because, something nicked the gas tank or something like that. But, here in Korea, you have wonderful cars. You very rarely see like a beat up car in Korea. So much so that if I see a beat up car that would just be like the same or even slightly better than a car that like a high schooler back home in Iowa would have, I'm always like, wow, look at that crappy old car, because everything's nice here. So
yeah, people seem to replace their cars here every couple of years. The roads here, there's no problem with the roads. They're well kept. I mean, especially in Seoul. It just seems like there's
even outside of Seoul. I've done a lot of driving with my girlfriend's family in the southern tip of the peninsula, and I haven't been to a place where the roads are bad. Maybe it exists, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, either have I really. Actually, I've been all over Korea, and I've noticed that everywhere you go, the roads are in great condition. The automobiles are in, they're brand new usually. So it is more of a issue with people's willingness to follow traffic rules. And part of the issue here is that people's GPS systems in their car will alert them when they're in speed traps. So people are going to be more likely to speed because they can get away with it. I think in the States, at least where I'm from, the GPS system won't tell you when there's a speed trap. You just get a ticket in the mail. A lot of times airplanes fly overhead to kind of catch people who are unwittingly thinking they're getting away with speeding. So it seems like the enforcement, especially in the Midwest, is a lot stronger than you get here in Korea.
Yeah, back home in Iowa, where I'm from, the cops, they respond to emergencies and stuff like that. But basically, the town cop in my part of town, where I was from, that guy wrote tickets. That was his main job, speed traps, and that would be sitting outside of town with the radar gun. But now in town in metropolitan areas, I guess maybe Des Moines would be called the metropolitan area now. It's a little bit more hip than it was 10 years ago. They have the speed cameras and things like that, and as well as the cops who will sit with their radar guns. So you're getting it from all over the place. So we'll talk about that a little later. But I want to go back through some of the winners, if you will, the most voted for scenarios from the polls. So number one was let's get real. Let's have some more enforcement of the rules. That was like 60 or 70 people, right?
Yeah.
And that's important because, as we've just been mentioning, it doesn't seem like an infrastructure problem, at least with the physicality of the road itself. It's a problem where people know they're breaking the laws, but they don't care. So they're de facto not really laws. And it's very telling that that's the number one. More than 100 people participated in this, but around 60 or 70 people, clear majority, just enforce the laws. That might be a solution. It's not going to happen, but that is a possible solution.
And I think a lot of that goes back to, back when Korea was more authoritarian than it is today, where the police were overstepping their boundaries. So these days, it almost feels like the police are a little bit, not necessarily scared, but they're a little bit hesitant to get involved with people's lives. Whereas in the States, you get pulled over, the policeman has a conversation with you. If he thinks you're being suspicious, he might even try to search your car. And I've never heard of a police officer ever trying to search someone's car here in Korea. I mean,
I would like to see a video of that exchange with the officer, in Korea, and he's like, "Excuse me, sir, I think I'm going to have to search your vehicle," and then the reaction on that guy's face or that woman's face. Oh yeah. Whereas,
one thing that's a little bit different in Korea with driving is that they do. I mean, they seem to enforce drunk driving pretty well here. They have.
Yeah, that's weird. I've seen checkpoints. They do that. It still happens here, and people get out of it because I've read about that type of thing. But you do see what appears to be an honest effort to catch drunk drivers, at least at certain parts of the town, certain times of the year.
Yeah, and you do see that where I'm from as well, but it just seems more prevalent and almost not nightly, but regularly, where they stop and check drivers to make sure they're not drinking and driving. Which, I mean, that if that was not enforced, things would even be, probably be more of a mess than they already are here because of the amount of drinking that goes on during the evening hours in Korea.
Yeah, but that's funny because when you think of bad driving in the States or like an accident, my mind just goes to drunk driving, because I've read about that. I know some people from back home who unfortunately have gotten drunk driving arrests and actually caused an accident and put someone in the hospital. And then they kept drinking. I can see on Facebook that they're still drinking now. But, whatever, people make mistakes. I'm sure you can still be a perfectly good human being and have been convicted of drunk driving. But that's something that comes to mind. But when I think of accidents and traffic, but when I think about it in Korea, that's never the issue. I've driven in South Korea, rented a car one time, did a short trip when I first moved here. And I never was worried about someone just slamming into me because they were drunk. It was, once again, because they don't care. They're going to cut me off. They're going to go really quick. They're going to, you're supposed to give like a couple car lengths of distance depending on how fast you're going. And you're supposed to have more car lengths if you double the speed or, 10 more miles per hour. I don't think I've ever seen people actually giving car length distances on the highway here. It's always just bumper to bumper.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of the accidents that are here it's either negligence on the part of the drivers or them not caring about others. I'm not really sure what the cause of it is. It just seems, that based on
it's enforcement, right?
It's enforcement.
That's it.
Well, I mean, it's also it kind of goes back to some of the social situations you see here in Korea where it's like kind of a me society. So if the person's not your family and they're not your friends or they're not your colleagues, people don't really care about, others. Or it seems, I kind of get that perception from living here that, random citizens on the street don't really care for each other. And that kind of reflects on the driving here as well.
Yeah, I've heard that brought up before, the whole idea that Confucian values sometimes only hold true for the people you know or your family members, and then, they go out the window when you're dealing with just the anonymous person on the road. But I really think that if I had grown up in Iowa when there was no risk of getting a ticket on the highway, no matter what you did, and there was no risk of getting any type of penalty for, realistically doing whatever the hell you want on the road, maybe I would drive that way too. I really don't know that it has that much to do with the culture. I really think that it is just enforcement. But let's move on. So we talked about the number one. What was the number two response here on the poll?
The number two is lack of using indicators for turning and pulling over, combined with use of hazards for anything else, causes confusion, accidents, and road rage. Which I guess is, a general gripe people have that, people aren't indicating very well. I do have friends here who drive, and I know they experience road rage because I've been in the car with them when they experience it. So for me, it almost seems like too much of a headache. Like I would never drive a car in South Korea because I just don't want the added drama. There's enough microaggressions that you experience on the subway or the public transportation system where I wouldn't ever want to up the ante by getting behind the wheel of a car here regularly.
What's interesting about this second one, it seems more technical. Like it's like, people are turning. No matter what the enforcement is, people still have to turn. So they're not using their signals. That causes confusion. Something that was mentioned directly that I want to bring up is the use of the hazard lights, the flashers. One time when I was in a car a very long time ago here in South Korea, I noticed that the cars in front of us were flashing their hazards like on and off. And the girl who was driving, she explained to me that meant that everyone was slowing down. Like, you're going at constant speed. And then when you see that you have to slow down really quickly, people will turn on their hazard lights for a couple seconds to show the cars behind them that change in speed is coming up. So while I've completely agree with everything that I've said so far about, the dangerous driving here in South Korea, tip of the cap to the Korean drivers. I've never heard of that anywhere else. Have you ever encountered that here?
Yeah, there's some kind of, I don't know if it's a mannerism, but you do see some stuff that's kind of unique to Korea. That using the hazards is one of them. I notice a lot of Koreans also put their car into neutral when they're at stoplights, and I actually asked about that.
In a fully automatic car.
Yeah, and I guess that's to save energy, save fuel. I don't know if I believe that or not, but that's another thing I notice that people do is they'll shift into neutral, which, I mean, that seems totally unsafe to me because you're not prepared if someone comes up behind you or, it seems like there could be all kinds of issues. But I've seen that happen so many times, and I've actually asked Koreans about it, and they say, it's to save fuel, but I don't buy it, really.
I see that a lot with taxi drivers.
Yeah, they'll shift into neutral at the stoplight. Again, I'm not quite sure what why that is particular to Korea. I've never noticed anyone doing that in the States. And same with the hazards. Or even just, people, it seems like they're not paying attention. They're just switching lanes without turning on their indicators. And that does seem to be a common problem, especially when you're on the freeways here. If there's ever a time you should, fear for your life, it's when you're behind the wheel of an automobile on the freeway in Korea, because anything can come at you. And you see in Oink, we see videos every week of just these crazy accidents on the freeway where, especially at high rates of speed and people not paying attention to what they're doing, not using their hazards or not using their indicators correctly, you're going to have these kind of accidents. And it seems like every week there's new videos of this kind of content. And I guess that goes back to when you mentioned about black boxes there, that you get some entertaining footage, and you get some horrifying footage too, from some of these accidents that are caused.
Let's just talk about the number 3 and number 4 responses, and we'll move on to parking. What was number 3?
Number 3 was that driving has improved significantly over the last couple decades. Number 4 was kind of similar to the first number 1 vote. It says the government just needs to enforce the law.
And so let's talk about number 3 then. So we discussed this a little bit. What do you attribute the change? I don't think it's the fact that certain foreigners are complaining about it and then Koreans are finally getting in line with some driving laws. What do you think's changing this? Is it that more people are driving, so it's becoming a more of a norm to have a car, or at least be able to drive a car, and that's changed the culture of obeying the laws just of your own free will, since the cops are going to not write you the tickets? Or is it something else? What is it?
I think people are just getting more used to driving cars. If you look back at the U.S. when we first got cars, or when they first became, kind of popularized in our society, the accident rates were just horrific. So, there's a learning curve for societies to learn how to drive correctly and learn how to follow the rules. I mean, in the United States, we've been driving for, probably over 100 years now, and we still have horrible rates of road deaths every year. So it's not like it's just Korea's problem, but
not anywhere near South Korea, though.
That's true.
And in the United States, as you know very well, coming from South Dakota, the best Dakota, as you put it. But my retort, there's only one Iowa. If you don't drive in the Midwest, you don't exist. I mean, maybe if you live in Des Moines or Iowa City, those are my references as an Iowa boy, but they have like some buses, or you could be lucky enough that you might be able to walk to work if you have some random job that's right next to where you live, but you have to drive. So I would argue that America is quite a lot safer than South Korea, because in South Korea you have wonderful public transportation. You don't have to drive. In many parts of the United States, you have to drive.
That's true. Where I'm from, you absolutely have to drive. You could maybe scrape by using public transport, but it would be a really challenging existence. So you have to have a car where we're from, and we kind of grew up around it. I mean, I got my driver's license when I was 16, and
16 driving to work every day in Des Moines. Yeah, I remember that.
And my parents really drove home the point that that you're getting behind the wheel of a machine that is capable of killing someone or killing you, and you need to be very careful about it. And that was really ingrained in me from a very young age. And I think a lot of younger kids in America get that that kind of education. Also we were trained to drive cars. I took a class on driving when I was a kid in high school, and they were very very, very clear that what we're doing is very dangerous, and we need to be absolutely careful while we're doing it. And so I've always kind of had a healthy respect for automobiles since I was very young. I know they're very dangerous machines. So I don't know if that kids in Korea are getting that same kind of I guess scare tactics from the people who are educating them about vehicles when they're younger. And from what I've heard, it's pretty easy to get a driver's license in Korea, even if you don't know how to drive. And I think I failed, my driving test. I think I failed it 3 or 4 times before I was able to pass.
Yeah, that's pretty common where I'm from, too, having to take it multiple times, even after you've gone through driver's ed. I know specifically here in South Korea, I've never taken the test. They recently changed it, or they're right now just about to change it because they said that it was too easy, or they just wanted to make it more difficult. But yeah, I know a guy, European, and in Europe, like a lot of things, if you have an EU passport, you can go to all the EU countries, and if you have a driver's license in one of them, I guess it works in all of them. So he lives in the Netherlands, and it's really expensive to get the driver's license there. You have to take classes and all this stuff. So what he did was, somehow it worked out, and he explained to me that he got his driver's license here in Korea, and it's reciprocal with the EU, or at least the Netherlands. And so then he got his Netherlands/European driver's license just because he got it here in Korea, and he saved a ton of money. And it was easier here than it would have been back there. So, yeah, perhaps more education is the answer. Real quick, before we move on to parking, were there any comments that were worthy of noting on this specific topic concerning driving in South Korea?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, one guy mentioned that he never drives here anymore, and he was thanking God for that, and he thought he would end up murdering someone through sheer rage and frustration if he continued driving in Korea. And that's kind of the feeling I get, from a lot of expats, is they just become just enraged. And it also makes their life, I mean, not to say that having a car isn't convenient, but it seems to make their life almost worse than not having it, just because of the amount of, BS they deal with on the roads on a daily basis. So I think, one key to having a happy expat life is maybe just to avoid driving at all costs here, if you can. And another guy mentioned that he had a longtime expat friend in Korea who used to tell me that he didn't know of any motorcyclist who eventually hadn't been in a serious accident, and that's pretty much true for me too. I mean, I know at least 3 or 4 friends here who drove motorcycles, and all of them were involved in accidents which caused them to be hospitalized. So that's another thing.
There have been expats that have died in moto accidents.
I was supposed to go to a party, I think back in 2012, 2013. I couldn't make the party, and one of the guys who attended the party ended up dying on his motorbike on the way home from the party later in the evening. So, yeah, I mean, that's something that you hear a lot about. You definitely, if you're driving a motorcycle in Korea, you have to be very, very careful, because it just seems like almost everyone you meet who drives here long enough will be involved in a serious accident. So that's an extra, added risk that you don't necessarily, you're less protected in a motorcycle. So I'm not even sure why an expat would want to drive a motorcycle here. I mean, I suppose it could be very fun and thrilling, but to me,
I would do it. It's just I'm afraid of being murdered, just like I'm afraid of walking in the crosswalk. And, you got to buy it. That's the thing. I mean, I don't want to throw a bunch of money down on something that I don't know anything about mechanics. So, had to pay some guy to fix it. And, but I would love to do it. I know I've ridden one in the past, and they were a lot of fun. But the thing I want to bring up about expats on motos here, and I don't want to stereotype, but I know at least 2 people who have gotten in trouble because they literally just bought a moto and drove it around, like no license, no insurance. I don't think they got in trouble for not having a helmet or anything, but they eventually got found out that they were riding these motos and no respect for any of the regulations. Not that they got in trouble for speeding or something like that, but just it eventually got found out. I guess if you ride one illegally enough, cop, eventually is going to run your plate or something and figure it out. One guy actually found a moto license plate on the ground and just put it on his and started driving with it. And then a cop checked his plate one time and found out that, I don't know, maybe they thought it was stolen or something, but it didn't belong to that moto, and he had to pay a really big fine. And another expat friend of mine actually got in an accident, but like didn't report it, and it wasn't his fault. Like the car hit him, and he was all in the right area he should have been. It wasn't like he was just driving on the sidewalk like a lot of motos here do. But he didn't end up getting any compensation for it, or probably even getting like his medical bills paid for, because he was riding a moto illegally. So he just went to the doctor and like, oh, I fell on my knee. So if foreigners are doing that, I guess Koreans probably are doing that as well.
Well, I think a lot of foreigners, they appreciate the freedom that they're given here with driving. And so they start taking up the mindset of the locals, and they just start ignoring laws. One of my friends, his favorite thing, about riding a motorcycle in Korea was being able to weave through traffic and, get home a little quicker than people driving cars. So it seems like a lot of foreigners here just like they eat that right up, and they start, breaking traffic rules too, because it's like, well, if we can't beat them, we might as well join them.
Yeah, might as well.
That's a huge issue with people. I think it used to be where you could get a bike under a certain number of cc's and you didn't need a motorcycle license. But I think now, it's pretty much all motorcycles need that license. And I'm not sure that most foreigners really follow that rule or even have a license to drive these things. So
yeah, it could be. Once again, these were two guys that I know specifically who, I know of, and they told me these instances. I'll leave them unnamed. Perhaps someone will recognize the story. But I also know foreigners who have insurance, have a quality motorcycle, or moto, whatever you want to call it, have a helmet, and are not breaking the law. So I just want to point that out. These are two people that I know, did things a little bit differently. But Travis, let's wrap things up here a little bit. Let's talk about parking. When it comes to parking, is it just the fact that, we often in Korea live in very big, overcrowded cities, and there's not enough room for parking, and this inevitably leads to some bad choices? Or is this something else? Is this just a blatant disregard for parking rules that are more lazy than anything else? Where do you put it?
I don't know. It's probably somewhere in the middle there. You see a lot. That is a common theme, or a common complaint among foreigners about the parking here. But some of it is, there is a lack of parking space. I think the only place I've ever been besides Japan that has elevator style parking for cars is Korea. So they put these cars in these like elevators and they park them. So I mean, there is definitely a lack of a parking space here, but sometimes it is just people being selfish. Someone wants to run into the store and they block up 2 lanes of traffic to do that. I've seen.
Yeah, they park in a lane of traffic. Like, it's not the shoulder of the road that's meant for parking. They just park in the road itself, and it's just a 1-lane road each direction. So you literally have to drive around them, but the oncoming traffic is coming at you as well. You see that every day.
Yeah, it seems like that's just like blatant disregard for the rules. Some roads are actually set up. There's a road over by Gongdo where it's set up in the evening. It's a road, but in the middle of it, you can park legally. And it looks kind of funny when you see it, but it does work because the traffic's still flowing and stuff. So some of it's, the setup of the system. I think a lot of it is, people don't want to pay for parking, so they're going to kind of try to squeeze in wherever they can get into without getting towed. I know, in the Itaewon area and Hongdae on the weekends, it's really hard to find good parking or to find any parking. So a lot of it, is a lack of space, and some of it is just people being lazy and not wanting to put any extra effort into finding a parking space. They don't want to drive around for an extra 10 minutes, and search for a spot. So, and some of it is, apartments. They don't offer parking to their tenants. So every night these guys get home from work late and they're forced to kind of seek out a parking spot. So some of it is just a lack of space, and some of it just is blatant disregard for others. It's a healthy mix there, I think.
Well, what's the solution then? My case, at least, for improving driving was improving enforcement of the laws. I don't think they need any special laws. They just need to enforce them. So do we need people driving around beep, 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 beep all day long and just, giving people tickets for horrible parking jobs? Or
Probably. They probably need some better way to report parking. I know they've tried to create several apps to do that, but it just seems like even though these apps exist, that nothing's being done to change it. So it's a constant issue that comes up, but it just seems like there's no steps or no, noticeable steps being taken to resolve the problem. Another thing is probably increasing the number of parking spaces available for people. It is, Seoul is a big city, but at the same time, it's not much landmass here. So you have to, you have to account for the number of cars on the road and the number of parking spaces available in order to kind of alleviate some of these problems. But I also do think it does come back to enforcement, and if they're willing to enforce it, and if they're willing to start handing out $100 tickets to people for parking illegally, the attitude's going to change very quickly.
And then, so finally, before we say goodbye, how do you think this compares with other countries? We obviously talked about the OECD statistics for traffic fatalities. Korea, number one, at least 2 years in a row. I think they're going to release some new statistics here in at least a couple of months. It seems like it would be the time to release the new statistics for this based upon how they've done it in the past. But when it comes to parking, is this similar, do you think, to other Asian countries? How do you think this compares to parking in the States, for instance?
Well, it's a lot worse than in the States. I lived in Minneapolis for a while, and they would have...
Really? You lived in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area?
Yeah, I went to school out there. I was out there for 4 years.
Ah.
But yeah, they would have, during a snow emergency, they would have each side of the road would be sectioned off, and you get towed if you parked on the wrong side of the road. And my university would tow people for parking illegally. And when you get towed in the U.S., it's a very costly situation.
It's
not cheap. Yeah, it's like $300. Yeah. And my friend got towed over in Haebongchon. He was towed, and I think it cost him like $60 or something to get.
Really, he got towed? I was just gonna say I've never seen a car get towed in Korea,
yeah,
but
towed.
You knew. Where did he park? He parked on top of a cop? I mean, what do you have to do to get towed?
He parked on a reserved spot, and he knew where to go get his car because they had a sign up that listed the towing company, and then he was able to easily find his car. But it was cheap. It was really cheap, and they didn't ticket him. They just towed him. They didn't give him a ticket or anything.
Nice.
So, so maybe making that kind of thing a little more costly to people who are violating parking laws might go some way towards reducing the number of people that are willing to park illegally.
All right. Well, that's interesting. I hope to meet this friend of yours. Like I said, I was just about to say I've never seen, other than when you tow a car after an accident because you just don't want to drive it or it's just so totaled you can't drive it. Can't say I've even seen someone get towed.
No, he was towed. He was pretty shocked. He was shocked by the towing, but it wasn't a huge ordeal. I think by the time we went to pick up a friend, we went to his house for a little bit and played video games, and then we came out. His car was gone, but I think we got to the station within 15 minutes, and his car was there. And it was a small fee to get it out of there. So
they probably sprayed the inside with a nice scent and cleaned off the glass. It's probably full service towing.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a bad deal. In the States, I think if you didn't have the cash to pay, they would keep it.
Oh, they won't give you back your car. No, when I lived in L.A., Emerson College has an L.A. campus. Like a lot of schools, they just have some places you can stay, and they call it a campus. Emerson has actually built a really big complex there, and it's an actual legit campus now. But when I was there in Burbank, it was just this gated community, and then some of the apartments were Emerson students, some of the apartments, I think, NYU, and then there was a bunch of unemployed actors who were there as well. It was just a normal gated community in Burbank. And I had parked in an area that was in cement. It was this hilly area. There are lots of small hills in Burbank, and behind the apartment buildings were just all these hills. But they basically had just put cement over all the hills, and you could park on the cement, or you could also park literally just on the grass a little bit further back where they stopped the cement. And it was just open country. Whenever you came back, you just kind of grabbed a parking spot. I parked in a spot that was not technically approved for parking. Like, it didn't have white lines, but people parked there all the time, and it was very common to just park wherever there was an open spot. But I guess someone had complained or something, because technically it made the roadway a little smaller, even though my car was one of many cars in that area. And I came out to go to work the next day, and my car was gone. So I got really upset, and I went up to the front clubhouse, and I was like, hey, you told me, but like I park there all the time. Many people park there, and they're like, well, that's technically not parking. I'm like, that's great. But I also remember at my orientation event with Emerson staff, they said that they will call your phone, and they will ask you to move your car before they tow you. Here's my phone. Where's my call? And I was like screaming and shouting at this guy. I hope I caused a scene, because this guy deserved it. And he's like, okay, well, that's a courtesy. We don't have to call every single person. I had to pay like $190. My car had been towed to a parking lot in the same complex, but they just wouldn't tell me where it was. I mean, I had my car keys. I was just going to run around and find my car, give them the middle finger, but I had to go to work. So I had to pay them like $190. Yeah, getting towed in America sucks.
Yeah, it's an ordeal. And I had a similar situation where I got towed during a snow emergency, and it was an ordeal to get the car back. I mean, but it does teach you at the same time to
never been towed a second time.
Yeah. I mean, once you go through it once, you'll never do it again. So I think maybe that could be one of the solutions, is if they're a little more willing to crack down on some of these people, then the situation will improve. Until then, you'll have Facebook groups mocking the parking here. You also have this parking vigilante. I don't know about this page. I'm guessing if they ever find out who's behind this page, these people
it gives a name, and you click on like contact. It says like, we welcome criticism or something like that. Like, they're pretty.
Oh yeah, actually, they have a Jinho Nam is the name. Who knows if that's real or not? I could imagine a lawsuit over this. We got there was a New York Times article this week about defamation laws in Korea, so I could see this somehow becoming an issue at some point. But for now, $10 will get you some vengeance.
$10 for 10 stickers. I gotta tell you, what I want to see though, and I'm not condoning this, because kids don't do this, but it would be interesting to see a video compilation of people who left those stickers on cars, deservedly so. Like, real offenders put that sticker there, and then they come back to the car, and you get that reaction shot. Now, this would have to be done with like a telescopic lens or something, because otherwise there'd be maybe like a fist fight or something. But I would enjoy seeing that video.
I think this isn't just Korea, but there's there's parking and driving enforcement videos out of Russia a lot. You see these parking kind of vigilantes or driving vigilantes where they'll stop people driving illegally down roads. So I think it's not just Korea where people are sick of this sort of behavior, and maybe the more people realize that they're doing something wrong, maybe that will help things to change a little bit. But if people just kind of aren't aware that they're doing anything wrong, maybe it's going to be the same until people kind of gain awareness that it's a problem.
What is that thing that they say in the States now? And I think Jon Stewart said it on his last show. It was like, if you see something, say something. Everybody, if you see something, say something. Let's change the world. One horribly parked car or one pedestrian who's run down in the crosswalk at a time. All right, Travis, that's all the time we have. No voicemail message this time. Last time we had a voicemail message.
Hopefully next week we'll get another voicemail. I guess I encourage people, if you're interested in the issue we're discussing, to definitely leave a message. We'll definitely change your voice. So yeah, if you are interested in sharing your opinion, we'd love to have it played on air.
It's koreafm.net/voicemail. All right.
People have no excuse not to leave a voicemail.
None whatsoever. Works on a computer, works on a mobile phone. All is good. So, Travis, I'll talk with you next week, and you have a good one.
You too.